So thank you all for coming. My name is Lisa Simmons. I am the executive director of the Roxbury International Film Festival. We are really excited to bring to you today this panel with BIPOC women independent directors. We are in day 7 of the Roxbury International Film Festival. We had some really incredible conversations, around all sorts of issues, situations that the film's themes bring up. And we're really excited to continue that conversation today. We just thought it was really important. It's sort of a record year with Black women and women of color filmmakers being part of this festival, and directors and writers that were really wanted to bring you a panel to have a discussion about navigating the independent film world. So I want to start with the filmmakers introducing themselves and their films, so you'll know if they haven't played yet already, or if you have the opportunity to see them, you will know where to find them. And then we'll open the discussion. So I'm going to start with Kavery. Hello.
Hi, Lisa. It's a tremendous honor to be a part of the Roxbury Festival. My film, The Bengali, is the story of a woman's search for her past. African-American writer Fatima Sheikh travels to India, where her grandfather came from. In these times when immigrants have been demonized, The Bengali captures the rich legacy of immigration. Fatima's grandfather was one of many men from India who arrived in the US and married into the African-American community over 100 years ago. Fatima goes to India to look for the truth in those stories she grew up with.
Thato Mwosa.
Hi, my name is Thato Mwosa. I'm a local filmmaker here in Boston. My film is Memoirs of a Black Girl, which is a coming of age feature film that focuses on a young, brilliant Black girl student, Aisha, who is up for a coveted scholarship. But things get complicated when she gives up names of girls that were smoking in the school's bathroom, and now she's labeled a snitch. She has to navigate the challenges of getting bullied while she's keeping her eyes on the prize.
And Cathleen Dean.
Hi, thank you. It's an honor to be here today and to be part of this wonderful panel. My film is a documentary entitled Wade in the Water, Drowning in Racism. And from seaweed to lost beach balls, sunseekers bump into all sorts of surprises off the coast of the Florida beaches. And for Black swimmers, there's a complex history of one of segregation, violence, and protest. And that's what my film explores, as well as the cultural and the spiritual relationship people of color have had with the water from ancient times to modern times.
Excellent. And Wanjiru Njendu.
Hi, I'm Wanjiru Njendu. I actually have 2 short films in the festival. The first film is Boxed, and Boxed is based on the true story of Henry Box Brown, an enslaved man who mailed himself to freedom in a crate. The film is a psychological horror set inside the crate and the 27 hours during his travel. He mailed himself from Virginia to Pennsylvania to freedom. And the second film is titled Stray. Stray is a horror about a young child who ignores her mother's warning about the Pied Piper tale and gets taken in the night. So both are very, very dark films of different types of Black experiences.
I wouldn't say dark. I would say one is so filled with tension and the other is scary. It's actually part of our Don't Go in the Basement series. So that is on Friday night, the 25th. So be sure you catch that if you haven't already. And I believe Kathleen's is screening today in Claim It. And Kavery's is closing night on the 26th. And Thato will hopefully be able to pick up her film when it gets distribution sometime soon. We have one other filmmaker who will be joining us, Beautie Masvaure, who we're going to try to get in here. So, and she did the film Shaina. So we brought all these women together because, well, they're women filmmakers and they're women filmmakers of color. But really, to really have this conversation about navigating the independent film world as a woman of color, and wanted to sort of just throw out the question about, it's not easy to make a film. It's not easy to find your crew to help take your vision and realize that into what you all have made. And it's not that easy. So I'd love to sort of just hear from each one of you, and feel free to talk amongst yourselves and say yes, and let's have this be a conversation. But what were some of those trials and tribulations? What were some of those feelings of success? And for people in the audience, how did you sort of navigate that in making your films? Why don't we start with Thato?
I think for me, the biggest challenge has always been funding. Funding is, grants are very competitive. And we applied to as many grants as possible, but we got the rejections, we got the many no's. And I think that was challenging, but I think you have to find a way as a filmmaker to make your film a reality. I think you just have to figure out where to get where to get money. So what I did was I did an Indiegogo, sent it out to my friends and family, but we also self-funded. I saved, fortunately I work full-time as a teacher. So I saved for a year just to put aside money for the film. And I think it's very common to get a lot of rejections because there's not a lot of funding out there. I think there's a lot more funding for documentaries, but less for feature films. And also, it's hard to find investors. I hear there's film investors out there, but I don't know where they are. So I think for me, it was just like, I want to make this film, and I will make it whether or not I get funding from outside sources. So we figured out a way. And I think that's the challenge, really. Like for me, it's like everything else is just the typical production is hard. It's grueling. It can be long hours of production, but that's part of making a film. But I think sometimes people don't get to do it just because a lot of people have said no. And I would say to filmmakers out there, the audience, that if you have a script and you want to shoot a film, figure out a way to make it. Try to also reach out to your community, because I think for me, what also helped in terms of locations, I didn't have to pay for a lot of locations. Mm-hmm. I just went in and connected with people that I knew and they were open. I went in and talked to my friends who opened their homes for production. I also shot in my house. So I made it happen. I said yes to myself at the end of the day because it's hard, but I was like, it had to be done, and I figured out a way to do it. And fortunately, there was a community that rallied around the film.
I agree totally with Thato that it's a really challenging, roadblocked process to get funding. But I do want to share one story that was like a blast out of nowhere that I know kept me going. I remember going to an event for another film I had made on a different subject. And I went very reluctantly because at that moment I was busy tearing my hair out about whether I'd be able to raise the money I needed then for the Bengali. I didn't feel it was a good moment to venture out among people. And at this gathering, I happened to be talking to someone who asked what I was working on. And I may even have answered very half-heartedly because this person had no connection to the film world. Well, this person surprised me, and it doesn't happen often. He said what no conventional funder was aware enough to say. He told me he had a grandfather who journeyed from another country, and he wanted to go back there to find out more about his family's roots. He couldn't wait to see the Bengali, and he wanted to help me in some way with funds. So there you have it. I would suggest to everyone to always be ready for the unexpected. It's really about the kindness of strangers in the end.
That's a wonderful story and really a blessing. I have to agree about the challenges of funding, especially a narrative film. I was poised to create a narrative film when COVID hit. And, things had been sort of trickling along, funding trickling in very slowly. I never did raise the budget necessary for that project. But I was able to pivot and switch gears. Luckily, I had started filming on Wade in the Water, collecting archival footage, and had shot a few interviews. So I just poured all my energies into that film. I did also launch a crowdfunding campaign with the help of some very special people in my community too, who heard about the film online. I was invited to give a private presentation via Zoom. To much to my surprise, there were about 100 aquatics professionals on this call from across the country who were super supportive of the film and the project, and we were able to continue raising funds through those connections. So there are challenges and there are triumphs.
Right.
Yeah, to add on to Kathleen's point, it's usually the same situation. I approach things with a two-part policy, fail forward, because you will always fall on your face as a filmmaker at some point. And then my grandmother used to say, the water will always find a way. When it rains, the water doesn't question where it's going, it just goes. And so just like Kathleen, I was raising money for a different project, a proof of concept for a feature. When that didn't go through, I was like, okay, this is my last. At the time I was about to exit working for a studio, I was like, this is my last tax return that will be of this size. This is going into me and investing in myself. And one of the things one of the execs had told me is, as creatives, we doubt our creative currency. And I asked him what he meant. And he said, go make anything, show your skill, the rest will follow. And so when I made Boxed, I had pictures, I had the trailer, I had some behind the scenes stuff, and I actually paid for the first round of festivals out of pocket, and then did a second round of crowdfunding. And the film is now on the 4th year of festival rounds because, people keep seeing it, talking about it, believing in it. But because I had something to show, even if it wasn't the whole narrative of what I was doing, it was enough to make people go, okay. And sometimes, unfortunately, the proof is in the pudding. Sometimes people have to see and be like, oh, what's actually happening? So that worked out for that one where, that story found me. I didn't fight it. As filmmakers, you can really hone in on, oh, I've worked on this for 9 years. Well, a different story will come and it will take you further away. It's like a baton, with the sprinters, it's a baton being passed. And at some point, you have to know when to let go of the baton or it will drop. And so it's that ability. It took me a long time to learn to be able to pivot and be like, to understand that not right now is not a no, because the other project, which I didn't raise money for, is in a good place now. But it's also that thing as a filmmaker, you also have to learn to say no and yes to yourself. Both of those words have to apply to yourself as well.
So do you all, I heard a couple of things. Saying yes to myself, which I think was really important, and to help prove yourself to you, and finding community, and finding a community that's going to support you. How important has that been? And, as women filmmakers, first of all, and then as women filmmakers of color, that's even adding on to it. Do you feel that your access to certain things, and not necessarily money, but even access to telling your story and getting people invested in your story, and even getting actors to be part of your stories, or if it's documentary, getting footage, finding footage, do you feel like they're, your other filmmaker counterparts who aren't women of color don't go through as much? I'm just curious.
I don't like to compare myself to others, but I will say any talk of funding can't be separated from talk of who we are as women of color filmmakers. To me, to be a South Asian woman of color has meant invisibility in this culture. Maybe you remember that it was Ralph Ellison who wrote, "To be invisible means that people refuse to see you." So he wrote books. And my answer is to make films. And that's, that's my way of saying, what is the problem? I'm not taking away your stories. I'm giving you mine.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no doubt that, like many women of color, I navigate through choppy seas. Which stories get told? Who tells those stories? Are we open to the untold stories? Why not? When all good stories are specific, because in the specific lies the universal. And we need all those good stories. The ones from the first indigenous peoples, as well as the ones from those of us who arrived here later, from different places at different times for different reasons. We each have something fresh and exciting to add to the American cultural narrative. To make those films happen shouldn't be a trial and tribulation, but it is. That's my take on it.
It's
Well,
true.
I mean, for me,
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Wanjiru.
Wanjiru. I'm just being quiet. I know you all have something to say, so I'm just going to let you think of your thoughts and then go for it. So Wanjiru.
well, I mean, it is the same. It's a plus and a negative, and I think the biggest plus is the resilience we have. But somebody said, you work twice as hard to get just half of what other people get. I have white director friends I talk to who get, money off a 5-minute phone call pitch. And on the other hand, you're told, do you have a lookbook? Do you have a storyboard? Do you have this? And I'm just like, we have the exact same skill set and resume and portfolio, but, you're adding 15 more hoops. And so for me, I found that, as a woman, it was never an issue to me because growing up, it was what my brothers could do, I could do. There was never that separation. So even I have the added advantage of coming to the US where you come in and you just have to be the best. You're not even allowed to look in the other lanes of people. That's how you're raised. Like you're supposed to be the best. Your parents sit on you at the table doing homework and that constant harping, be the best, be the best, be the best. And, even if you start saying, but this person, that's not allowed to be an excuse. So I feel that right now it's definitely much easier and it's a bigger opportunity and people looking at us and seeing the versatility in our stories and not just one type of story that we can tell, but also that type of, oh, you did this, what else do you have? Or what type of take do you have on this particular project? So it is a plus on both. It's just a matter of, and I think we have an ability to read people just by being in a conversation and in being a room. There's an intuition moving through the world as a woman of color that you have that I think makes you a better filmmaker as well.
Thato, you were going to say something about that.
I mean, I grew up Kavery and Wanjiru, but I think when I think about who's at the table, who's making those decisions, and do they look like us? Most of the time, they don't, right? And I think that point of view or that perspective, they'll always gravitate towards the stories that they relate to. And they'll always say yes to those stories, because if I'm bringing a story that is sort of not in the kind of like vision or they connect to, they're probably not going to fund it. So at the end of the day, I think we also need to be, there needs to be kind of like more people of color at the table making those decisions at the top, because then they can connect to our stories and believe in our stories and give us some give us the funding. I think it's just, to me, it's just natural, because every time I apply to grants, sometimes I look at who are the judges, who's like actually vetting the screenplays and something like that. And I remember there's a screenplay competition that I applied to, and I looked at all the judges. There were 99% white. Actually, there were 99% white women, and there was one white male. And then when, of course, I got a rejection, when I looked at the accepted people, 99% white, and there was one black woman. And I always feel there's always like, if we're all Black women applying for that lab, the screenplay lab, we're competing for one position, because they'll always say, oh, we need to have diversity. Let's just, fight. So it's like 100 of us are not competing for 10 seats. We are competing for 1 seat. And just because it's just the nature of how people view our world. And I think if the judges, the diversity of the judges change, then maybe there'll be more people actually connecting to our stories and bringing us in. So it's there is kind of like an improvement happening, but I still think we have a long way if we are not at the top, if we are not in the room.
I know we've been making films for a long time as women of color, and we'll keep making films because that's what we do. We tell our stories, we fill a void from our point of view. But like you said, Thato, we're only one piece of the puzzle. Whether there'll be a broader cultural shift remains to be seen. It depends on how the gatekeepers see their role. And that's an intriguing word, I think, gatekeeper. Does it mean keeping people out or letting people in the door? I think there has been some progress because there are more of us now and there's strength in facing the challenges together. And Lisa, we have programs like what you offer here at Roxbury of not just one film by one woman of color, but films by so many of us. And that's a significant statement in itself.
Right. I mean, it's
really
not right.
is.
You're not a monolith. So yeah, I mean, that's really important to us. But Kathleen, yeah.
Yeah, I just, it's so exciting to not be the only one. And I just wanted to kind of go back to what Thato was saying about the grant process. I don't know how to say this in any other way, but I hate it. It's exhausting. I'm like, I'm a filmmaker. Why do I have to spend all this time on this grant application, which is so complicated and cumbersome? And at the end of the day, is this all these words on these papers going to really translate to my artistic vision as a filmmaker? I'm not sure. I got additional blessings with this project. I did not go the grant route. I did have that community of supporters, but also had support through a festival that had a work in progress competition. So I cut together a trailer of my initial idea. And I'm like, that's what I can do as a filmmaker. That's how I create. So I submitted a work in progress trailer or sizzle reel and, won some funding. And then I went back and submitted a rough cut and won additional funding for that. I was able to get to where I am today, and having, won some funding, I'm starting to launch the process to turn this short documentary into a feature length. So it's definitely challenging.
It is, and I want to hear from Beauty as well about this. But I mean, the whole grant process, though, too, is not geared for us, right? It's not. You know what I mean? That's a whole other thing about thinking about philanthropy in this country and what philanthropy, how it was created. It was never really created for us in any kind of, whether it's, put in arts and culture. So how do we change that dynamic, and how do we, and how do we find more people, venture capitalists, business people of color who we can validate how important the work that you're doing around filmmaking is, because like Kavery says, it is like we are bringing stories to you. We're bringing these stories that we're bringing voice to the voiceless. We are telling stories that you might not know about, and that's really important. So I don't know.
And another thing to do with funding and particular spaces that have to be curated. I call them curated spaces because it's oh, let me weigh this papaya is heavier than this mango, so I'll let the mango in. Even as you get into that space, it's curated. And I wanted to share an example of, even if you're in this space, you have to also, as an artist, recognize if you got into a space that's not for you. Got into one of the top screenwriting labs, not the space for me. They keep telling me what my script is. And she had a very specific script with a very specific voice and wanted to shoot it in the local dialect. And she looked at I think my slot is for somebody else. left the lab, made to make, and won the BAFTA for the best first feature BAFTA. And the same festival was clamoring for her film the next year. But I found that so courageous of her, because she uses the word curated a lot. And, you know, who is to say that person is the right person for that project? You know, tastes vary. Today I might want rice, tomorrow I don't want rice. But
Right.
is as you know, as Thato said, are these people looking at it that even if they don't understand it, can they see the little nugget, you know, as I've read scripts that, you know, when they come together, the filmmaker doesn't know to picture. So the question becomes, are they seeing the potential? Are they working with, we had 3 African films here. We had, you know, 1 Bulgarian filmmaker, you know, so is it just checking off the boxes and then whatever is left is curated to fit into that space?
Yeah, and it shouldn't be. It should be about story. I mean, we curate based on story. We don't know. It's not like, oh, I need to have 20, you know, women of color filmmakers, and we're not saying, okay, we don't have one of these. It's like we're curating on the stories you tell. So, like you said, it's like you have a good story, you want to tell that story, and that's really important. You know, for you to not lose sight of that and not write for somebody else because you want to be in a certain festival, or you want, or you think that somebody needs something. You're writing for yourselves, and that needs to have value. So how big of a difference is that for all of you? I mean, to be able to be on a set like that and to be able to not have to, as Beauty says, explain yourself, right? Explain, like, this is what we want out of the scene, this is the character, this is the culture. You know, I remember I made a short film 150,000 years ago, and you know, I was the producer, and everyone on the director and the writer was Black. I was the producer, but everyone that was on the set was white, and I was constantly being challenged. You know, from the line producer, who was like, "Well, she basically doesn't know what she's doing. Well, I'm not even going to give her any. I'm just going to take over," to the point where he would start doing things on the set where I was like, "No, that's not going to happen." So how important is it for you all, and do you make a point to work with people of color on your sets?
Oh, sorry, I was gonna.
No, I was just going to say very briefly that I will only work with people who are committed to the project and who get it and who are nice. I don't explain in my professionally or personally in my life. People need to educate themselves. And that's not my job. That's not my role. And you get a sense of whether a person, that's part of the process I go through before I bring someone onto one of my projects, whether they will understand, whether they will respect, and whether they will just absorb the material around them, recognizing that it may be unfamiliar to them in some way, but then process it and appreciate it. And that doesn't always happen, but it's one of the guards that goes up in me as soon as I sense that someone just doesn't get it.
You know, to decide all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely challenging to have to get your project vetted through a lens that does not understand the culture or the language. And I believe that there's are probably a lot of, I mean, Kavery, I love your strength in that you're like, I'm not explaining anything, that's great. But, you know, often there are those gatekeepers in the way, or the people who believe that they understand your story better than you and just don't get it, and, you know, present obstacles. I think there are probably a lot of young filmmakers who don't move forward with their stories because they face those challenges of people reading their scripts who don't understand the story or the culture or the message. And that's something, when I have some more time on my hands, I want to start mentoring young filmmakers more, because I've seen that firsthand. And, you know, it made me second guess myself. I'm like, wait a minute, you know, am I writing this, you know, is my dialogue true? You know, is it still happening? I had a short film called Being that I produced right before, you know, all of the terrible things that happened in 2020. And someone challenged, it involves a racist police officer. Someone challenged that. And I was like, well, is it over? I mean, and then George Floyd happened. So it's a constant challenge. And, once we are able to fund our own stories and produce and direct them, I think there's going to be so much more, on the landscape that, we have to share and tell about our experience as people of color, coming from very, very different, look at this panel here, very different backgrounds.
Right. And you're very different filmmakers, and that's, that is by design. And, I hear all of that, and I think, and there's some great questions in the chat, and we're going to get to that, but I didn't know if anyone else wanted to touch on that. I do think that as women of color, it is, it's just a truth. It's just a truth. And we're not going to, shove it under the rug. You all have amazingly, and continue to break those barriers. And, you might not think you're trailblazers, but you are. There are other trailblazers who get notoriety, and we know who those trailblazers are. But in the independent film world, for women of color, and for you all in particular, I see you as trailblazers, because I know what you've had to go through to actually complete your projects, whether they're shorts or features. And not only having to explain yourself on the set, but then, and there's a quick question about in here too about distribution, and then you've got to explain yourself again about why you should pick up this movie, why you should bring this movie to a film festival, why it should go on Netflix. You know what I mean? Like this, there's these constantly, at every move, it seems like we're constantly having to explain ourselves. So Wanjiru, you wanted to talk to them.
I'll use 3 points. I always tell people direct somebody else's work, because that lets you know what your voice is as a director, to identify and translate somebody else's work. Direct your own work with your own money, because you can unapologetically make something, and if it resonates with people, then you know that your instincts are correct. If it doesn't, you eat the humble pie and ask yourself why it didn't. But one of the things I tell people, especially when people approach me with projects or come to me and be like, we'd love for you on this and that, I pay very close attention to what came to me. I always have my notes open on my phone, and I put in the specific reasons. We loved the way you did this. We loved this. We read this about you. So that those are the loops I hold on to if we ever reach that point of butting heads where I have to stand my ground on something creatively. And another thing I find is when you flip a question. I once remember on a project I shot that we delivered just before COVID lockdown. In the development process, the executive said, why isn't this happening to the person? And the question was, we flipped the question and asked him, why would that work for you? And he wasn't able to back up his own story point that he wanted us to find. And a lot of times, you have to remember you're dealing with non-storytellers that in their head, oh, I saw this in the news. This had happened to so-and-so. And even though they say they're not, it's an unconscious bias they have, because that's the stereotype that he was putting on us. But when we flipped it and put the burden of him or proof on him, he wasn't able to back it up, and it was squashed right there. He didn't even try bring it up again. That was the end of that. So it's also I tell people, it's a Japanese saying, speak once, listen twice. People will always give themselves away in conversations, and try and make as many notes as you can, because that will be tools for you. People will inevitably give you what you need later down the line to be able to say, oh, you came to me, and not in an arrogant way. You can say, this project requires this type of light. This is what I've done in terms of my lookbook, in terms of my tone book, and that's kind of thing. Like, figure out what they give you and what your strengths are, because they will say them to you. It's like a first date. People put on their makeup, best behavior, but they will tell you everything that's great about you, and then slowly water it down, because they still have an agenda at the end of the day. But you have to remember that first date and what they're the ones who said, come over, we need you. And you know, it's something that's been lost, that creators and, you know, creatives, actually not creators, creatives are still needed and wanted.
Well, you know, Lisa, one thing you said, granted, you know, I don't know if I'm strong, I'm very stubborn. So I don't want to explain my culture to other people in ludicrous ways. But there is always a fight at every step. There's no doubt about it. And one of the fights we face is this misguided notion that there's no audience for our films.
Right. Yeah.
Women of color go to films, people of all our communities go to films, and it's simply not true. You have to see the audience in terms of people that don't necessarily look just like you. They go,
Right.
You just don't see them there. You don't go to the same theater at the same time, maybe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's really important. And I think that, you know, there's constantly being holes thrown into that theory about that happening. And which is why independent film festivals are really important, which is why, you know, finding people in the distribution world to support, which we need more of. You know, there's been some questions in the chat and Q&A as well about sort of, and I had that question too, you know, that it seems like Black film is having its day. Black women filmmakers are growing every day, opportunities to be in film festivals, people wanting Black content. It's like, we need to have Black content. Like, what do you have? Like, you know, and like you said, Kathleen, I think, well, like there's one person Wanjiru, one person can come into that festival. Do you think that this is a shift and we're moving in the right direction, or do you think that this is a trend?
Things seem to sort of ebb and flow. I think like the public suffers from amnesia. Like, you know, remember when Spike Lee burst out onto the scene? You know, that was a heyday. There was Spike Lee and Matty Rich and all these great filmmakers that came out at that time. I might be dating myself. But then before that, you know, there was, you know, Mario Van Peebles, and before that there was Sidney Poitier. So there's been these peaks of Black excellence in cinema going way back to, you know, Oscar Michaud. And they've brought in money in the box office, but the gatekeepers have amnesia, and they forget that, you know, millions of dollars were made on Black film. And then you can go back throughout, you know, time. There have been classics created in every decade. So I know things have changed right now. And again, there's a need, and there's a desire, and provisions are being made at studios to accommodate Black storytellers. So will everyone forget when this wave is over? I hope not. But I mean, history has shown that we do tend to forget.
And it depends.
It's like the in thing now. It's like the in thing, and we have to be very careful that they are putting us forward to do this, and at the end of the day, we might be expected to fail. So I think it's very important that we handle this.
I think that's right. I think, Beauty, at the end of the day, they're waiting for you to fail. And Thato, I know you wanted to say a couple of things, so I want to give you that opportunity. So, you know, I mean, you've made a couple of short films. You made Memoirs of a Black Girl. You shot it here in Boston. It was great because you got to use your students, but it's still the same thing about finding locations and having to explain what you're going to do, and making sure that wherever you're using space too, maybe that you're not telling some movie that's going to make people look bad or something like that. But I mean, it's just those things about, you know, are you constantly having to explain yourself?
Yeah, fortunately, I think for me, I've always produced my film.
Right, I know.
I cannot imagine someone telling me what to do. Like, I'm already having like anxiety. I'm like, if I get funding and someone comes in and say, hey, I'm going to give you this amount of money, will they be calling the shots? Because I don't know how to take direction from another person in terms of like when I do. And most of the time I write my own film, and it's already living in my head. I just have to like take it out of my head and shoot it. So I mean, and I'm gonna go back to the question before, where when it comes to crew, I look out for people of color and women. First and foremost, it has to be like women or people of color. I have worked with white males before, but they had to be understand that I was calling the shots and respect my leadership, because 10 years ago, is it 10? I'm trying to think. Okay, 14 years ago, I shot a series in New York, Yama Africa. I don't know, Wanjiru, if you remember that, a long time back. Actually, yes. So I had an executive producer. They hired me as a director, but I was also getting producer credits. I fought for that. But they controlled the budget, and they also came in with a crew that I did not hire, and it was mostly men. And I remember having this experience where I'm trying to explain to the DP what I need to do, and he does something else because he didn't really trust what I'm asking him to do. And he's like, no, this is this way. I'm shooting it this way. And one thing, and I'll never do this ever again, I cried on set because it was so frustrating to a point where I just literally cried. I was surrounded by this men, and none of them were listening to me. After I cried, they became so afraid of me. They thought I would cry every time. And then they listened to me. I think my tears just kind of like, oh my gosh, she's gonna cry again. I better listen to her. And it worked out really, I mean, it was embarrassing. I was really embarrassed that I broke it down and cried. But I think they ended up really kind of realizing what they needed to do. And also the executive producer had a talk with them, because I was like, there's no way I can do this. I wrote, and it was my vision. I wrote all the episodes, but this guy's had a totally different vision for the show. I mean, even at the completion of it, the editor that was hired to edit the series, that was not my hire, and they didn't do a good job. I still have not finished watching that that series, because every time I do, it was I think it was I have the DVD. It was about 12 episodes. I think I've gotten to episode 3, and every time I watch it, it's so painful, because that was not my intention. That was not my vision. And I realized from that experience that whenever I have to make a movie, I want to select people that will understand that will understand my vision and actually respect me as a woman director. I always like to work with women, and I also want to give opportunity to people of color, because we don't get hired in the industry.
Right.
Whether you are a cinematographer or you are a sound person, I always want to give that opportunity to so people can also get experience. In Boston, it's tough. What I learned was, especially for other crew members, like the sound and lighting, there isn't a lot of people of color doing sound and lighting, and it was so frustrating. But I ended up working with these two amazing, they were really great white males that were very nice and very respectful. But I was really trying to find people of color to be part of the cast. Majority of the cast of Memoirs of a Black Girl were people of colors. John ended up doing the cinematography for it, great guy, and other people that were on the set. So it's tough. I don't know what it looks like for my next projects. If I do end up getting funding from someone who wants to executive produce, we'll have to be on the same page. They also have to understand that that if they give money, they are not 100% calling the shots. They're giving money to support me and to trust me that I'm going to execute on my vision that they believe. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think that that's so true. I mean, we could talk forever. Unfortunately, we don't have time. So I have 1.5 more questions for all of you, for you guys to answer. You know, I mean, making a film is hard. It's hard regardless of who you are. Making a film as a woman of color is, as we know, as we've already discussed, you know, difficult. It has its ups and downs. So where do you find your energy? Where do you go to find that space and that place where you come out and be like, this is who I am, this is what I'm going to do? And then, you know, what's your dream project? That was a question. What is your dream story that you really want to make and that you feel maybe is important for us to hear? So I'm going to start with Kathleen.
You know, filmmaking for me is a labor of love. I don't think that I could not do it. When I get frustrated and need a little me time, I go to the beach and I meditate. And I actually do that every Sunday morning. I have a mindful practice, community practice. My dream project, gosh, there are a few. Right now I'm working on putting together a treatment for a travel show that involves sustainable and organic farming for individuals, small community gardens and farms. So I would like to travel around the world, visiting farms, telling the stories of the people who grow their own food and how it affects their lives and their communities.
Wow, that would be amazing. I'd watch that. Definitely watch that. Kavery, you're muted.
My energy comes from my need to tell a particular story. And frankly, it's driven by an insanity that keeps me glued to the project till it's done. And when I need a refill of energy, I listen to music, and that keeps me going. I hate to call any project my dream project because all these projects were my dream projects. And it's like making value judgments on films that were made at different moments of my life that were dreams. And I'm delighted that those dreams came true. I do have a project I'm working on right now, which would bookend the Bengali with the stories of the first people from India who came to the West Coast. And they too had an interesting life in the desert, in the California desert, where they married Mexican women. So I think these are stories that have to be told. And if I listen to the music, I'll get there.
Absolutely. Wanjiru?
For me, my first one is music as well. I live on making playlists and constantly just looping through music to find a song to add to a playlist, to a project, or just an inspiration. Pinterest, I spend a lot of time on Pinterest. It's a really magical rabbit hole. But on a personal one, just for mental health, I do coloring books, adults and children coloring books. It is incredible when you have to focus on staying inside the line, how you really ground yourself and find a way to reset. But also other people's art. I like really old films, so I have a massive list that my friends and people I know are constantly adding to. I really love black and white silent films, so I always make a point of trying to watch other people's art. And I like to go, to watch older films, to watch, if I have a film that brings me a specific type of joy, that I will rewatch. But constantly looking at other people's art, people's photography, just going and seeing what somebody else is creating, taking 10 minutes out of your day to be like, oh, what is this thing? Or if I see an image on Pinterest, I'm just like, oh, what else can this lead me to? Which photographer is this? So just even though I have to focus on my craft, I have to remember that I'm part of a bigger puzzle. that exists, and that, I think the other day on another panel, somebody said we're a battleship,
Yeah, right.
with different pieces, and just the other pieces matter. It's very easy to just stay singular and focused, but just by you seeing something, you can inspire yourself to something else. I don't know what I was watching the other day. I was like, oh my God, there was a point I was stuck in a script and watching something. I was like, this is such an easy fix, but because I had been so fixated on it and so tunnel vision, that it took me doing something else mundane to have that moment open up. So.
In your dream project?
I'm going to be a 10-year-old child and say it is the live action version of the Thundercats. I grew up loving that cartoon series, and it really surprises
Thundercats.
Yeah, it's always the one that throws people for a loop, but it's a film about a family, but it's also just, it had that youngness and childhoodness and just the duality of two faces. I always look in a story of what duality is a big thing to me, whether it's in Greek deities, in African mythology. And so that was a great one where you had, all these felines that are also humanoids, and just, I could go on about it for a very long time.
We're gonna have to have a whole separate panel about Thundercats. And Beauty, what about you? What gives you energy, and what do you and you're on mute. So, and what about your a dream project that you wanted to do? You have to unmute.
I enjoy networking. I like networking, whether it's parties or just going to a park or, music, all kinds of things, because I find that when I network, there's so many stories that you hear about, and that gives me, that inspires me, just hearing different stories from different people. Helps me, develop my own stories better, and helps me come up with more ideas. And so I think that's where I draw my energy from. And just because I'm also passionate about stories, and I like the fact that I get to work on different projects and different stories, and I like to tell good stories. So I think networking is my thing, and that's what inspires me to want to do better and more.
Do you have any project that you've always been wanting to do?
So the project that I want to do, or that I'm really been working on for a long time, is to do with the spirits, African spirits. Just focusing on the spiritual side of Black African people. There's a lot that a lot of people in the world could learn about, and just beautify it a little bit, make it beautiful, because a lot of the time the way it's been perceived is that it's horrible, or it doesn't exist, or people don't do that, or but I am working on a spiritual type of movie where I'd like people to watch and respect the culture and the tradition and see the beauty in it. And I think it's time we tell the spiritual side of our stories.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And last but not least, Thato, your energy and your dream project.
So for energy, I'm an illustrator, so I create a lot of art, especially on my downtime. But I also discovered running. I ran this morning. I started running during the pandemic. I just needed to get out of the house. I think I just needed to get out and run. So it turns out that I could run. I used to run one block, and then I'll be so tired. And then I started to do like 1 and then 2. Now I run 2 miles every time I go out, and it's incredible. It's a great feeling. I come back energized, actually. And I read a lot. I'm part of 2 book clubs. One is a Toni Morrison book club, which we've been reading her books for a year. And it's like a book every month, and it's been great. Every time I have nothing to do, I grab a book. But in terms of my dream project, I want to shoot in Africa. I want to shoot in my country, Botswana. I have a movie that I wrote based in Botswana, A Blue Dawn. That's my dream project. I think for me, it's like my dream to shoot in my home country. And you know, I'm based here, and it's so difficult. But for now, I was able to connect with a production company in Botswana. And I'm trying to figure it out. So my dream project is a fully funded Blue Dawn in Botswana, and someone will come in and fund it.
Yes,
so I'm excited about that. I'm hoping that I'll be in Botswana next year, at least doing either location scouting or shooting it. So I don't know what's gonna happen, but I'm excited for it. It's gonna happen either way, whether someone gives me money, I'll find a way. So that's the project that is next, and then I've got other projects that I'm working on in Boston. If I don't get to go to Botswana, then I'll be here. I will shoot Clarity, which had a reading the other day. So I'm just looking at all these projects that need to be done. And the one thing I had to do was cut down on my time at work to give me more time to do my projects. So hopefully things will work out. Yeah, I'll be part-time here. So
that is that's incredible for all of you. Yeah, I mean, because you all are doing so much. It's not just filmmaking. It's navigating the world. It's so I applaud you all for the incredible work you're doing. Look forward to the work that you're going to bring us, that we can follow you. You might not think of yourselves as trailblazers. You might not think of yourselves as, you know, like premier filmmakers in this industry, but you are. I mean, there are so many people who are learning from you, who want to learn from you, who will learn from this conversation. And I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to have this conversation. We need to have more of these conversations for us and for more of them for all of you to be able to connect and network, and I hope you do, and support each other's projects. So we can't wait to have you back at RoxFilm, as Allison says, with your new projects. And if there's anything we can do to help, you know, let us know. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone.